Days of Gold in Sepia is about a young, impoverished, penniless boy who sets out from his homeland in the deserts of Kutch and makes his way towards Bombay and grows on to find fortune and fame. It's set between a period of 1857 to 1947, which is really a very exciting time to be in. You know, in Bombay you had the merchant princes and you had the Maharajas and you had the soothsayers and you had the British, the English we liked and the English we didn't like so much, and there were the freedom fighters. It was really a very vibrant time, and I thought the perfect time to set a book like that. So this is young Lalji Lakha, whose parents die when he's 6 years old. They are wiped out during an epidemic, and he's sent off, backed off to an old relative's place, whom he has never known. And on her deathbed, her mother gives him a locket and says, and gives him an address, and he is asked to go to this place of a stranger's house. So there is Lalji Lakha, all of 6 years old, being trundled off in a bullock cart, and he goes off to his Mamu's house. And he spends the next 10 years of his life there. And when he goes there, there is a young cousin, and she's only 2 and 3 years old. And I think any reader of old stories knows that these two are going to fall in love. So it's the story of their romance as they grow up. And then when he's about 16, he's forced to leave his uncle's house, leaving behind his first love. So all through the book, you have this great abandoned first love and unrequited that haunts him. And he goes on to Bombay and he becomes a cotton king, and he assumes acquires vast wealth, vast fame, vast social position, but always his longing for Reshma never ends. And then you hear through his eyes, you see that time. I also wanted to depict Bombay. I wanted to depict the city. It is a city I loved, and I wanted to make it come alive. So apart from Lalji Lakha, our amazing protagonist, there is also Bombay, which plays a major role. And you see it come alive and how it grew. And I think all the snippets I found when I was doing my research made it very exciting. And so we follow Lalji's life through his own life, his mistress, his concubine, the way he grows, the people he meets, his own family. And he's a very interesting character because he's a character of courage and great personal integrity, but he has the normal frailties. He does have a mistress. He does hanker, like all good Indian men, for a son. He has 4 daughters, but the longing for a son is always there. And the novel takes you through the paces of his life and also shows how Bombay grows alongside. And I hope it does, to an extent, bring out the magic of a city like Bombay. Not only Bombay, but also the scene at that time across the country. There's been a deliberate attempt to bring in characters from all over, with just a touch here and a touch there. So that is the story of Days of Gold in Sepia. I think people ask you when you've written a first novel, is this autobiographical? And to the extent that Bombay comes alive, it is my first passion. It's the city I grew up in, it's the city I loved. I've walked to it, I've walked through its streets, I've sat on its shores, I've dipped my feet in its waters, I've climbed up its low hills. It's completely a part of me, and I think that does come across in the book. So to that extent, my book is autobiographical as far as Bombay is a part of me. Well, I always knew I wanted to write, ever since I was a very little girl, maybe even in single digits. But I never applied my mind to it. I never thought what it is I wanted to write. But I did grow up with a lot of old stories. Stories my mother told me, family stories, and later, surprisingly, what my mother-in-law told me. And all these stories were gestating. And it was only much later, close to 20 years ago, when my father died, that we all sat around together and more old stories began to come out of the woodwork. And I realized that I didn't have to look for some great subject or a great event, that ordinary stories were extraordinary, as we all know. And I decided that I needed to create this rags to riches story, which could bring out a bit of our history, because my grandfather came from Kutch, as did my husband's. And so that sentimental attachment was there. And it showed how different people came through to Bombay. And through those stories, through the book, I wanted to depict some of the stories, not very obviously. They are sort of blended into the fiction, and also to bring alive the city. Well, it was fascinating. I said, now, what is the research I need to do? And you must remember that I grew up listening to stories. And it's a completely different charm when you listen to a story as versus reading it. And when you listen to a story, it's a very personal thing. It's a living thing because there's somebody asking you a question or somebody telling a tale. And it's a live thing. The story will change depending on who's telling it, who's listening, whether it's you're sitting around a fire in the evening or whether it's in the cool, clear light of day. And because I'd heard these stories, I felt that my research had to be more of the same. So I caught hold of all my friends and I said, do you have a nani who will talk to me? Do you have a dada who will talk to me? And it's to get hold of old people. And I wanted to hear them speak their stories. And I wanted to see the expression in an 80-year-old's eyes when she talked of her wedding day at 18, or how a dada said how he came out, or the troubles he had and how, in his youth, etc. Because it's a completely different thing. But of course I also did a lot of research because I wanted facts and figures about Bombay. I wanted to make it alive. I wanted to present facts about it that were not easily known to me, but which I thought were interesting, and blend it in somehow into the story. So there was that kind of research, yes. Well, some of those I must say I've lifted blindly. Like Lalji goes on to have daughters, and the story of two of his daughters I've completely lifted from family law. Of course, the aunts are no longer there. And, but I thought they were ordinary stories. It's about one of his daughters who dies of TB. I can tell you the story because it's the kind of book that you can read again and again without losing out, because it's not a whodunit. And her younger sister is forced to marry her widowed husband, which is a story quite common in a lot of families in India where that happens, especially when there's a child involved, because you always feel the younger daughter will be a good mother to her sister's child and also a good husband, a wife to her widowed husband. And in our family, it just didn't work out. This younger sister was extremely unhappy, and finally she got divorced and came home. And when I was a child, about 5 years old, I saw this younger sister, which is why the story was so clearly etched in my mind when I grew up and understood the nuances of the story. And so that is a story I've put in entirely. And so that's how it's come. There were other characters. There were some are not stories that have been lifted, but characters, like the hankering for a son, the getting of a second wife, many instances that have been there, brought into the book. I think not. I've been very surprised really with the reaction to this book, because so many people have come back, and it's interesting that each one relates to a different aspect of the book. And somebody says, oh, it was just like this in my family. Or somebody says, my house broke down was just like this. And somebody said, I have a sister like this. And so people are obviously connecting to these stories. And I remember asking my publisher once, I said, do you think anybody under 60 is even going to read this book? And so I was very pleasantly surprised when people are giving the books to their children, their daughters-in-law, their sons-in-law, and those people are not throwing it completely, entirely, quickly into the garbage, but actually making an attempt to read it and coming back. I've spoken to book clubs for young people. So obviously there is a connect. And if the stories were dead, they wouldn't be coming back. Lalji Lakha lived a long life. He died at 88. And I think there's not been one grand message through, but I think there are a lot of little messages. And like I say, each one finds the message they want. I know only one of two discerning friends said, it's amazing how well you've managed to say so much and get away with it. So obviously she saw a lot of the little, a touch here, a touch there, a lot of little messages. And I think for those who seek, they shall certainly find them. You know, for some reason, everybody wants him to be based on somebody, but I hate to disappoint everybody. And like I say, Lalji Lakha is entirely mine. He's a character from my imagination. He's, I say, an amalgamation of many characters that I've known and liked. And I was a little reluctant to make him larger than life, and I've tried to bring him down to earth. But he comes across as quite a nice guy on the whole, I think. No, I think you know, because it says on the cover that it's a story about a lost love. And so you have all through the book this hankering for a first love. And it's amazing how far it can take a man. Because right to the end, Lalji never gets over Reshma. Oh, he has a good life, he has a good relationship with his wife, he has children, he lives life, you know, to the hilt. he travels. He's an extremely good father, surprisingly, for that time, when the relationship for a lot of people in India of father and daughter was very remote. But he is a good father to his daughters in spite of his hankering and yearning for a son. And though Reshma remains a dream, somehow she is a very strong presence through the book. A young girl who was interviewing me, she was in her 20s, and she said, "How long did it take you to write the book?" Innocent question that everybody asks. And I don't even think she was listening. And I said, 20 years, and she sat up and she thought, my God, I'm just 20 something, and this lady took 20 years to write a book. So like, I don't know if I have a book in me, but I don't know if I have 20 years. But I think next time I'd be much more organized if I did want to write a book. Because this first book was for me, really. There was no agenda. I didn't tell anybody about it till it was actually, I had a signed contract in my hand. Not even my family. Nobody knew about it. Because I wanted it to be mine. I wanted to write it at my pace, about my characters. There was no agenda. There was no wanting to write a big book or a bestseller or a prize winner or to any particular audience. It was for me, and it was a wonderfully freeing experience. And that's something I really treasure. No second book, even if there is one, and even if it's vastly more successful, can never match the pleasure of writing this first one. I guess that's the way I am. I don't say more than is necessary. And it worked for this book. And I think it was, when I did tell the family, they were rather pleased, so it did work out well in the end.